Racism rarely begins with a shout. Sometimes it begins with a gate, a badge, and one person deciding who belongs. The morning sun cast long golden streaks across the security checkpoint outside Fort Arlington Joint Command in Northern Virginia, where every arriving vehicle slowed beneath reinforced steel barriers and every uniform was expected to speak for itself. Military transports rolled through with practiced precision. Civilian contractors flashed credentials without hesitation, and officers exchanged respectful nods before disappearing behind layers of guarded fences. It looked like another ordinary Tuesday, the kind where nothing unexpected was supposed to happen. Then Officer Marcus Bennett arrived, dressed in a perfectly pressed dark blue uniform. Marcus stepped from a government sedan, carrying a slim black portfolio stamped with a federal security seal. His polished boots reflected the morning light as he approached the checkpoint with calm confidence, never rushing, never demanding attention. Years of disciplined service had taught him that true authority rarely announced itself. It simply arrived on time. Before Marcus could present his credentials, Officer Ethan Walker stepped directly into his path. Tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing the unmistakable confidence of someone convinced his badge gave him the final word, Walker raised one hand without offering so much as a greeting. "Hold it right there," he said, his voice carrying across the entrance loudly enough for nearby personnel to glance in their direction. Marcus stopped immediately, maintaining the composed posture expected of every professional officer. "Good morning," he replied evenly. "I'm here under official orders." Walker barely looked at the identification Marcus extended. His eyes lingered instead on Marcus himself, studying him with visible skepticism before lowering the credential. "Official orders?" Walker repeated with a dismissive laugh. "Funny, nobody mentioned someone like you showing up here." Several contractors slowed their pace. A pair of soldiers waiting beside a transport truck exchanged uncertain looks before quietly turning away. Marcus remained completely still. "You'll verify the authorization code," he said calmly. "Everything should become clear." Walker folded his arms instead. "I don't need a code to recognize when something doesn't add up." His words drifted across the checkpoint, inviting silent curiosity from everyone nearby. A delivery driver paused halfway through unloading equipment. Two administrative staff members stopped talking. Even the security cameras seemed to stare longer than usual. Marcus glanced briefly toward the distant administration building, then back at Walker. His expression never changed. "Someone is expecting me," he said. Walker smirked. "Then they can keep waiting." The air suddenly felt heavier. Somewhere beyond the perimeter fence, the faint rhythmic sound of helicopter blades echoed across the morning sky. Few people noticed at first. Those who did assumed it was another routine arrival. Marcus heard it, but showed no reaction. Walker certainly didn't. Confident that he controlled the situation, he stepped closer to the security barrier and signaled another officer to keep the gate closed. "Nobody walks through here until I know exactly who they are," he declared. Marcus simply nodded once, neither offended nor intimidated. He adjusted the portfolio beneath his arm and quietly checked the time on his watch. "Understood," he answered. "It won't be much longer." Walker gave a short, amused shake of his head. "That's what they all say." At that exact moment, several black SUVs appeared beyond the entrance road, escorted by military police motorcycles moving in perfect formation, while the helicopter overhead descended slowly toward the executive landing zone, and every conversation around the checkpoint faded into complete silence. The approaching convoy moved with quiet precision, its dark vehicles gliding toward the checkpoint beneath the steady rhythm of the descending helicopter. Yet Marcus Bennett remained exactly where he stood, his shoulders relaxed and his expression unchanged. Around him, the atmosphere shifted in subtle ways that only careful observers could recognize. Conversations ended in the middle of sentences. Drivers straightened in their seats. Uniforme de personnel instinctively adjusted their posture as if responding to an invisible signal. Officer Ethan Walker noticed none of it. He remained focused on Marcus with the confidence of a man convinced that authority belonged to whoever controlled the gate. "You picked the wrong place to test your luck," Walker said, folding the identification card and handing it back without another glance. Marcus accepted it politely. "I am not testing anything," he answered. "I was instructed to report here at exactly 9 o'clock. Walker glanced toward the digital clock mounted above the security booth. 9 o'clock had just passed by less than a minute. "Then whoever sent you can explain themselves later," he replied. "Until then, this gate stays closed." A younger security officer, standing nearby, shifted uneasily. He had quietly noticed the federal authorization seal on Marcus's portfolio and the unusually high clearance markings printed on the credential. They were not the kind of documents seen every day. He leaned slightly toward Walker. "Sir, perhaps we should verify the clearance through command." Walker dismissed the suggestion with a wave of his hand. "I know how to do my job." The younger officer fell silent, though uncertainty remained written across his face. Marcus looked briefly toward the convoy, now slowing near the entrance road. The lead vehicle displayed military registration, unlike the standard-based transports entering throughout the morning. Behind it followed two identical sport utility vehicles and an escort detail whose movements were measured rather than hurried. None of the passengers were visible through the dark glass. Marcus quietly adjusted the cuff of his uniform and waited. Patience had become second nature after years of service where timing often mattered more than speaking. Across the checkpoint, several soldiers standing beside an equipment trailer noticed the approaching vehicles and immediately stopped what they were doing. One removed his cap, another quietly stepped aside to clear the lane, and a logistics supervisor reached for his radio without saying a word. Even the air seemed different now, filled not with tension, but with expectation. Walker finally glanced toward the convoy, then shrugged as though it had nothing to do with the man standing before him. "Busy morning," he muttered. "Does not change anything." Marcus nodded once. "No, it does not." The helicopter settled smoothly onto the executive landing pad beyond the administration complex, its blades slowing as uniformed personnel quickly assembled nearby. At almost the same moment, the lead sport utility vehicle rolled to a gentle stop only a few yards from the checkpoint. Every conversation disappeared. The security booth became so quiet that the faint click of cooling engines echoed across the pavement. Walker instinctively straightened his uniform, expecting another routine inspection from senior leadership. He never imagined that the reason for the convoy had been standing patiently in front of him the entire time. The rear passenger door of the lead sport utility vehicle opened with deliberate calm instead of dramatic urgency, and every pair of eyes at the checkpoint followed the movement without anyone saying a word. A senior military aide stepped out first, scanning the area before opening the second door. Then General Robert Hayes emerged, his decorated uniform carrying the quiet weight of decades spent leading men and women through moments that demanded judgment instead of noise. Conversations stopped completely. Soldiers standing along the roadway immediately came to attention. Civilian employees instinctively stepped back to clear the entrance. Even the helicopter crew across the landing zone paused to watch. Officer Ethan Walker quickly adjusted his posture, assuming the distinguished visitor would proceed directly through the secured entrance. Instead, General Hayes looked neither toward the administration building nor toward the waiting command staff gathered several yards away. His eyes swept across the checkpoint with calm precision before settling on one person, Marcus Bennett. The general's expression softened into immediate recognition. Without hesitation, he walked past the security barrier, past the assembled officers, and directly toward the man who had been waiting patiently since sunrise. Marcus offered a respectful "Salute." General Hayes returned it without delay before extending his hand with genuine warmth. "Officer Bennett," he said clearly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I apologize that you were kept waiting. We have an important meeting ahead of us." Marcus accepted the handshake with quiet professionalism. "Good morning, General. I appreciate your concern." For several long seconds, no one moved. Walker stared at the two men, struggling to understand what he was seeing. The younger security officer who had earlier suggested verifying Marcus's credentials slowly lowered his eyes, realizing his instincts had been correct from the beginning. The command staff approaching from the administration building exchanged puzzled glances before one colonel hurried forward carrying a digital tablet. "General Hayes," the colonel said respectfully, "the conference room is prepared." The general nodded briefly, but did not break his attention from Marcus. "Excellent. Officer Bennett will be joining us." The sentence landed over the checkpoint like a sudden change in weather. Several officers looked toward Marcus again, this time seeing details they had overlooked before. The federal security seal, the immaculate uniform, the confidence that had never depended on proving anything. None of it had changed. Only their perception had. Walker finally cleared his throat. "General, there appears to have been a misunderstanding." General Hayes turned calmly toward him. There was no anger in his expression, only measured curiosity. "A misunderstanding?" Walker hesitated before answering. "I was attempting to follow security procedures." Marcus remained completely silent. He neither interrupted nor attempted to defend himself. He simply stood beside the general exactly as he had stood alone only moments earlier, composed, respectful, and patient. General Hayes glanced briefly toward Marcus's unopened portfolio. "Officer Bennett carries authorization that was personally approved through my office yesterday afternoon," he said evenly. "His arrival was expected before 9 o'clock this morning." The younger officer quietly looked down, remembering the exact time Marcus had arrived. Walker felt every nearby eye turning toward him, yet the silence around the checkpoint remained remarkably respectful. No one celebrated. No one whispered. The lesson unfolding before them required no raised voices. Sometimes the strongest measure of character was not revealed by how someone behaved when they held authority. Sometimes it was revealed by how they carried themselves when everyone else believed they had none. General Robert Hayes waited until the silence settled naturally before speaking again, never raising his voice because he did not need to. Real authority had a way of commanding attention without demanding it. He placed one hand lightly on Marcus Bennett's shoulder and turned toward the small group of senior officers who had gathered near the entrance. "We are already behind schedule," he said calmly. "The briefing begins in 20 minutes, and Officer Bennett's presentation is the reason every department represented here adjusted its calendar." Several members of the command staff exchanged surprised glances. One Navy captain quietly checked the agenda on his tablet before his eyes widened with recognition. The title of the first classified session listed Marcus Bennett as the principal operational advisor. Walker noticed the captain's reaction and felt uncertainty replace the confidence he had carried only moments earlier. The younger security officer remained silent, but his attention never left Marcus, trying to understand how someone who had accepted public doubt with such patience had become the central figure in a meeting involving leaders from multiple branches of government. General Hayes accepted a secure folder from his aide before handing it directly to Marcus. "Everything you requested arrived from Washington before sunrise," he said. "The secretary reviewed your recommendations personally." Marcus accepted the folder with the same calm professionalism he had shown since arriving at the gate. "Thank you, General. I appreciate the team's work." There was no trace of pride in his voice, only quiet respect for the people around him. That simple exchange answered questions nobody had dared to ask aloud. Marcus had never come to request permission to enter. He had come because the nation's highest defense leaders expected him there. Walker swallowed hard before stepping forward. "General Hayes, if I may, I was simply attempting to enforce security procedures equally." The general looked at him with measured patience. "Security procedures are essential," he replied. "Assumptions are not." No one interrupted. No one shifted uncomfortably. Every person standing near the checkpoint understood that the conversation had become larger than one delayed entry. General Hayes continued, "Professional judgment begins by examining facts before reaching conclusions. Credentials exist for a reason. Verification exists for a reason. Respect should never depend upon personal assumptions." Marcus remained completely silent, allowing the lesson to stand on its own. He neither sought an apology nor appeared interested in embarrassing anyone. His restraint became impossible to ignore. A logistics supervisor who had watched the entire exchange quietly remembered how Marcus had greeted Walker politely from the very beginning. A civilian contractor recalled that Marcus had never once raised his voice despite the growing crowd. Piece by piece, the morning replayed itself in the minds of those who had witnessed it, and each memory highlighted the same truth. The calmest person at the checkpoint had also been the one carrying the greatest responsibility. The general glanced toward the administration building, where additional officials now waited outside the conference center. "Officer Bennett," he said with a slight smile, "there are people inside who have traveled more than 1,000 miles to hear your assessment. I would rather not keep them waiting any longer." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Yes, General," as they prepared to walk toward the secured entrance together. Every barrier that had seemed so significant only minutes earlier now stood wide open, revealing that the strongest doors were never made of steel, but of the choices people made before they truly knew who was standing in front of them. The short walk from the checkpoint to the executive conference building felt strangely quiet, not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone present understood they had just witnessed something far more important than a scheduling delay. Marcus Bennett walked beside General Robert Hayes with the same measured pace he had maintained all morning, carrying the secure folder beneath one arm, while members of the command staff naturally fell in behind them. No one rushed ahead. No one attempted casual conversation. Inside the building, polished marble floors reflected the morning sunlight pouring through tall windows, and American flags stood beside the flags of every military branch lining the entrance hall. A reception officer opened the conference room doors before the group even reached them. "Good morning, General," she said respectfully. "The representatives from the Department of Defense, Cyber Command, Homeland Security, and the Joint Chiefs have all arrived." General Hayes nodded once before looking toward Marcus. "Excellent. We can finally begin." As they entered, nearly 24 senior officials rose from their seats. Some wore military uniforms covered with decades of distinguished service. Others represented civilian leadership from Washington. Yet despite the impressive gathering, several of them smiled immediately upon seeing Marcus. A Navy admiral crossed the room first and extended his hand. "Officer Bennett, it is good to finally meet you in person," he said warmly. "Your analysis has been circulating through our offices for weeks." A senior intelligence director nodded in agreement. "Your recommendations have already changed how several agencies coordinate sensitive operations." Marcus accepted each greeting with quiet humility. "I appreciate the opportunity to contribute," he replied. "Everything we accomplished came from teamwork." His answer earned respectful smiles around the table, because everyone present understood that genuine professionals rarely claimed individual credit. General Hayes moved toward the front of the conference room, where a large digital display showed the meeting agenda. At the top of the screen, under the heading Strategic National Security Review, the first scheduled presenter was clearly listed as Officer Marcus Bennett. Several officials opened thick briefing binders containing charts, timelines, and operational summaries prepared under Marcus's leadership. One senator quietly remarked to the Secretary of Defense's senior advisor, "I have heard impressive things about him." The advisor smiled. "You have only heard part of the story." Meanwhile, outside the conference building, Officer Ethan Walker remained standing near the checkpoint, replaying the morning in his mind. Every decision now seemed different from the way it had only minutes earlier. The identification card he had barely examined. The authorization seal he had dismissed. The calm voice that had never challenged him. The respectful greeting he had ignored. None of those details had changed. Only his willingness to see them had. The younger security officer approached carefully before speaking. "Sir, I think you tried to tell us everything we needed to know." Walker stared toward the conference building where the heavy doors had quietly closed behind Marcus and the nation's senior leaders. "Yes," he answered after a long pause. He did. For the first time that morning, the checkpoint returned to its ordinary rhythm. Vehicles continued through inspection. Credentials were verified. Radios carried routine updates. Yet something invisible had shifted among the people who had watched the encounter unfold. Procedures remained exactly the same, but many silently promised themselves that from this day forward, they would examine the credentials before judging the person carrying them, because the greatest failures of professionalism often began long before anyone realized they had made one. Inside the secure conference room, the heavy doors closed softly behind a last attendee, sealing away the quiet tension that had followed everyone from the checkpoint. The room itself reflected decades of national service rather than luxury. Large digital displays covered one wall, detailed maps filled another, and a long oak table stretched through the center beneath the flags of every military branch. Around it sat men and women whose decisions affected millions of Americans every day. Yet when General Robert Hayes took his seat, he did not begin the meeting. Instead, he looked toward Marcus Bennett with complete confidence. "The floor is yours," he said. Every eye in the room shifted toward Marcus. He stood without hesitation, connected a secure drive to the presentation system, and within seconds the screens displayed carefully organized intelligence assessments, infrastructure maps, and coordination timelines prepared over many months. There were no dramatic graphics and no unnecessary words. Every page reflected discipline, preparation, and remarkable attention to detail. Marcus spoke with the same calm voice he had used outside the checkpoint. He never rushed. He never attempted to impress anyone. He simply explained the information with quiet precision, outlining vulnerabilities, recommending practical solutions, and demonstrating how cooperation between military, federal, and local agencies could strengthen national readiness while avoiding unnecessary duplication of effort. Questions came quickly from every direction. A Marine Corps lieutenant general asked about operational logistics. A Homeland Security official requested clarification on interagency communication. A Cyber Command director challenged one projected timeline. Marcus answered each question without becoming defensive. When he did not know a number from memory, he opened supporting documents immediately instead of guessing. When another expert offered a stronger recommendation, he acknowledged it without hesitation and incorporated it into the discussion. As the meeting continued, something became increasingly clear. Marcus had earned the respect filling that room long before anyone had learned his name. His reputation had never depended upon rank alone. It had been built through years of consistency, preparation, and integrity. Nearly an hour later, the final slide disappeared from the screen. Silence settled over the conference room, followed by steady applause that was professional rather than ceremonial. General Hayes smiled. "Officer Bennett," he said, "your work will shape national planning for years to come. On behalf of everyone here, thank you." Marcus inclined his head respectfully. "It has been an honor to serve alongside so many dedicated professionals." Across the table, the senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense leaned forward with a thoughtful expression. "General," he said quietly, "I understand now why you insisted Officer Bennett lead today's briefing personally." General Hayes nodded. Character is revealed long before credentials are read. Unfortunately, not everyone recognizes that lesson at the same moment. Meanwhile, outside the conference center, word of the morning's events had quietly spread throughout the installation. No rumors exaggerated the story because the truth required no embellishment. Those who had witnessed the encounter described the same details every time. Marcus had remained respectful. He had remained patient. He had remained professional. The only thing that changed was how other people chose to see him. Even Officer Ethan Walker could not escape that realization. Standing alone near the security office, he watched another line of visitors present their credentials, and this time he examined every identification carefully before speaking. His voice sounded different now, measured instead of hurried, respectful instead of dismissive. The gate had not changed. The uniform had not changed. The regulations had not changed. Only the person enforcing them finally understood that the first responsibility of authority was not deciding who belonged. It was making certain that fairness belonged to everyone. By late afternoon, the classified meeting had concluded, but its impact continued moving through the installation long after the conference room doors opened again. Senior officials departed in small groups, exchanging thoughtful conversations instead of formal speeches. Several paused to thank Marcus Bennett personally, not only for the quality of his recommendations, but for the professionalism he had demonstrated throughout the day. General Robert Hayes remained near the entrance, speaking briefly with department leaders before turning toward Marcus with a quiet smile. "You represented every value this uniform is supposed to reflect," he said. Marcus answered with the same humility that had defined every moment since sunrise. "I simply did my job, General." Hayes nodded. "Exactly. That is what makes it worth remembering." As the final convoy prepared to leave, the general requested one additional stop before departing the base. Rather than driving directly to the airfield, he instructed his security detail to return to the main checkpoint. The unexpected decision surprised several members of his staff, but no one questioned it. Minutes later, the familiar line of dark sport utility vehicles rolled slowly toward the same security gate where the morning had begun. Officers standing watch immediately recognized the convoy and came to attention. Ethan Walker stood among them, his posture perfectly straight, though the confidence he had worn earlier had been replaced by quiet reflection. General Hayes stepped from the lead vehicle once again and approached the checkpoint without hurry. Marcus remained several steps behind, allowing the general to lead the conversation. Hayes looked around at the officers gathered there before speaking. "This entrance protects one of the most important facilities in our country," he began. "The responsibility carried here is significant, and every decision made at this gate reflects the values of the institution behind it." Nobody interrupted. The only sounds came from distant aircraft engines and a light breeze moving across the flag above the guard station. The general continued, "Security demands vigilance, but vigilance must never replace fairness. Verification requires discipline. Respect requires character. The two are strongest when they exist together." His eyes settled briefly on Walker, not with anger, but with unmistakable purpose. "Every person who approaches this gate deserves to have facts examined before assumptions are formed. Uniforms may differ. Backgrounds may differ. Experiences may differ. Professional standards cannot." Walker lowered his eyes for a moment before answering honestly. "General, I understand that now." Hayes studied him quietly. "Understanding is the beginning. What matters is what you choose tomorrow morning when another unfamiliar face arrives." Walker nodded slowly. "It will be different." Marcus finally stepped forward, his expression calm and free of resentment. He looked directly at Walker before extending his hand. For a brief second, Walker seemed surprised, then accepted the gesture with sincere gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. Marcus offered a small, respectful smile. "Every day gives us another opportunity to serve people the right way." The younger security officer watched the exchange with admiration, recognizing that forgiveness often required more strength than winning an argument. As the convoy departed for the airfield and the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the checkpoint, the gate looked exactly as it had at the beginning of the day. The concrete barriers had not moved. The security booth had not changed. The regulations remained exactly the same. Yet every officer standing watch understood that something far more important had been rebuilt there. Not the entrance to the installation, but the standard by which they would welcome every person who approached it from that day forward. The following Monday morning arrived with clear skies and the familiar rhythm of another workday at Fort Arlington Joint Command. But those who had stood at the checkpoint the previous week carried something new with them. It was not fear of discipline or concern about reputation. It was a deeper awareness that every decision made in a matter of seconds could shape another person's experience for years to come. Officer Ethan Walker reported for duty earlier than usual. Before the first vehicle reached the inspection lane, he carefully reviewed the updated verification procedures distributed by command. The changes were not dramatic. They emphasized complete credential verification, professional communication, and impartial treatment for every visitor regardless of appearance, assignment, or background. As Walker read each line, he realized that the policies themselves had always reflected those principles. What had changed was the commitment to applying them consistently. Throughout the morning, military personnel, civilian engineers, contractors, and visiting officials approached the gate in a steady stream. Walker greeted each person respectfully, accepted every credential with equal attention, and verified every authorization before reaching a conclusion. The younger security officer standing beside him noticed the difference immediately. There were no hurried assumptions, no dismissive comments, no unnecessary interruptions. Every interaction followed the same professional standard. Shortly before noon, a retired Army sergeant arrived driving an older pickup truck with faded paint and military veteran license plates. His visitor pass contained an uncommon authorization code that required additional confirmation. Instead of questioning the man personally, Walker contacted base operations, verified the documentation through official channels, and welcomed him inside with appreciation for his years of service. The retired sergeant smiled warmly before driving through the gate. "Thank you for treating me with respect," he said. Those simple words stayed with Walker long after the truck disappeared from view. Later that afternoon, General Robert Hayes received a brief update from the installation commander regarding the checkpoint. The report described improved professionalism, positive feedback from visitors, and stronger confidence among the security team. Hayes placed the report on his desk and smiled quietly. The lesson had accomplished exactly what punishment alone could never achieve. It had changed daily behavior. Across town, Marcus Bennett had already returned to Washington, where new responsibilities demanded his attention. He never spoke publicly about what had happened outside the gate. He never shared the story during meetings or interviews. For him, the most meaningful outcome had never been personal recognition. It was knowing that future visitors might experience something better because one difficult morning had encouraged people to pause before judging. Weeks turned into months, and the story gradually became part of the installation's leadership training for newly assigned security personnel. Instructors never focused on individual embarrassment. Instead, they asked a simple question at the end of every discussion. Have you verified the facts, or have you only trusted your first impression? That single question became a quiet tradition repeated by supervisors across every shift. It reminded experienced officers and new recruits alike that professionalism was measured long before challenges appeared. It was measured in ordinary conversations, routine inspections, and everyday choices that often seemed too small to matter. The checkpoint remained busy, the regulations remained strict, and national security remained the highest priority. Yet everyone who served there understood that protecting a nation and respecting its people were never competing responsibilities. The strongest institutions were built by those who remembered that fairness was not a favor offered after trust was earned. It was the foundation upon which genuine trust was built in the first place. Autumn arrived quietly across northern Virginia, painting the trees surrounding Fort Arlington Joint Command with shades of gold and deep crimson, yet the lesson that began on one ordinary morning continued to shape countless ordinary days. New officers joining the installation quickly noticed something different about the checkpoint. Every visitor received the same greeting. Every credential was examined with equal care. Every question was asked with professionalism instead of suspicion. The standard had become part of the culture rather than a temporary reminder. Officer Ethan Walker often found himself mentoring younger personnel assigned to their first security rotation. He no longer measured success by how quickly he moved vehicles through the gate. Instead, he emphasized accuracy, fairness, and the quiet responsibility carried by every decision. One afternoon, a new recruit asked him what had changed his perspective. Walker paused before answering. He looked toward the entrance road, where another line of visitors patiently waited for inspection. I learned that the easiest mistake to make is believing you already know someone's story before you read the first page, he said. The young officer nodded thoughtfully, unaware that the advice had been earned through an unforgettable experience. Hundreds of miles away in Washington, Marcus Bennett continued serving with the same humility that had defined his entire career. His work remained classified, his schedule remained demanding, and his name rarely appeared in public headlines. That never bothered him. Recognition had never been his mission. Service had. Whenever colleagues praised his leadership, Marcus always redirected the credit toward the teams working beside him. He believed the strongest professionals were remembered, not because they demanded attention, but because they quietly made everyone around them better. Months later, General Robert Hayes delivered a leadership address at the National Defense University. Speaking to future military and civilian leaders, he shared a story without mentioning names, locations, or ranks. He described a security gate, a delayed arrival, and a simple decision that revealed the difference between authority and character. Then he asked a question that lingered throughout the auditorium long after the lecture ended. When someone stands before you, what do you notice first? Their appearance or the facts? No one answered immediately because everyone understood the question was not about military service alone. It was about every workplace, every community, and every conversation where assumptions could replace understanding if people allowed them to. The story quietly spread beyond the installation, becoming an example discussed during leadership seminars and ethics training across multiple agencies. It was never remembered because someone important arrived in a convoy. It was remembered because one man chose patience when frustration would have been easier, another man chose growth after recognizing his mistake, and a respected leader chose to teach instead of humiliate. Years later, visitors passing through the checkpoint saw only another secure military entrance where dedicated professionals carried out their daily responsibilities. They could not see the lesson woven into every greeting, every verified credential, and every respectful exchange. But it was there, living in countless small choices repeated day after day. Because in the end, uniforms may represent authority, titles may reflect responsibility, and ranks may command respect. But character is the only thing that gives any of them lasting meaning. A badge can open a gate. A title can open a door. But only integrity can open hearts, and that is where justice quietly begins.